The red sands of Jikara stretched endlessly beneath the triple suns, waves of heat distorting the horizon where jagged black formations rose like teeth against the amber sky. Kale squinted against the glare, adjusting the protective goggles that kept slipping down his nose. Unlike the rest of his expedition team, whose equipment had been custom-fitted, Kyle had to make do with modifications to standard gear, another reminder of his outsider status among the hunters of Obsidian Spire. "Keep up, small one!" Darek's voice boomed from ahead, carrying a note of mockery that made Kale's jaw clench. The expedition leader stood a full 2 heads taller than Kale, his broad shoulders and muscular frame the epitome of what a hunter from Obsidian Spire was expected to be. Kale quickened his pace, his lighter frame allowing him to navigate the shifting sands with agility the others lacked. What he lacked in stature, he compensated for with speed and endurance, qualities that had earned him a reluctant place on this elite team, despite the constant derision. "I'm right behind you," Kale called back, keeping his voice neutral. 6 standard cycles on this expedition had taught him that responding to taunts only invited more. The hunting party of 8 was 3 days out from the Obsidian Spire settlement, tracking what the locals called the apex predator, a legendary beast said to rule the deepest reaches of the Red Desert. Stories told of a creature that could move like shadow through sand, with claws that could shred hardened plasteel and jaws powerful enough to crush stone. Most believed it to be myth, but recent attacks on the settlement's water harvesters had the council convinced otherwise. Jara, the team's tracker, and the only member who treated Kale with anything approaching respect, dropped back to walk beside him. Her tall, lean form moved with practiced ease across the dunes. "They're anxious," she said quietly, nodding toward the others. "No one's ever tracked an apex this far into the deep sands." Kale studied the tense postures of their companions. "They're not anxious. They're excited. Glory hunters. The lot of them." Jara didn't disagree. "The council's offering a substantial reward. It's not about credits for them. It's about status." Kale adjusted his pack, feeling the weight of extra water containers he'd insisted on bringing. "They want to return as legends." "And you?" Jara asked, her violet eyes, characteristic of those born on Zikara, studying him carefully. "What does the outsider want?" Kale smiled thinly. "To prove them wrong." Before Jara could respond, Darek raised his fist, bringing the party to an abrupt halt. Ahead, the sand had been disturbed in a wide swath, as if something massive had been dragged across it. "Fresh tracks," Darek announced, his voice hushed with reverence. "The apex passed here less than an hour ago." The team gathered around the markings, excitement rippling through them. Lorne, the weapons specialist with shoulders like boulders, clapped Darek on the back. "Looks like we'll collect that bounty sooner than expected." He grinned, displaying a row of teeth filed to points, a bizarre fashion statement among the elite hunters of Obsidian Spire. Kale approached the tracks cautiously, noting details the others seemed to overlook in their excitement. The sand displacement pattern was unusual, not the straight drag he'd initially assumed, but a sinuous movement, like a massive serpent had undulated across the surface. And, at irregular intervals, deep puncture marks indicated something had anchored itself before propelling forward. "This isn't right," he murmured, mostly to himself. Vex, a hunter with a shock of crimson hair and a perpetual sneer, overheard him. "What would you know about it, little man? They don't have predators like this on your soft homeworld." The others laughed, and Kyle felt the familiar heat of embarrassment creep up his neck. He'd left Earth 10 years ago, but his height, average by Earth standards, marked him as different on a world where natural selection had favored taller, more robust builds to survive the harsh environment. "I'm just saying the movement pattern is strange," Kale said, keeping his voice even. "Whatever made these tracks doesn't move like any predator I've studied. Perhaps you should stick to studying rather than hunting." "Then," Darek said dismissively, We camp here tonight. Tomorrow, we make history. As the team began setting up their shelter domes for the night, Kyle continued examining the tracks, taking samples of the disturbed sand and running them through his portable analyzer. The results confirmed his suspicions, trace elements that didn't match the surrounding terrain, suggesting the creature had come from somewhere else, somewhere with different mineral composition. When he shared this finding with Darek, the expedition leader waved him off. Save your scientific babble for the academics back at the settlement. Small one. We're hunters, not researchers. That night, as the others celebrated around the thermal unit with stories of past hunts, each tale more exaggerated than the last, Kale sat apart, reviewing data on his pad and making notes. Jara eventually joined him, offering a ration pack. "You should eat," she said, settling cross-legged beside him. "Tomorrow will be demanding." Kale accepted the pack gratefully. "They're underestimating what we're tracking," he said quietly. "These aren't the marks of a simple predator, no matter how apex it might be. There's intelligence in these movements." Jara's expression turned serious. "You think it's sentient?" "I think it's something we haven't encountered before," Kyle replied. "And charging in with plasma rifles blazing might not be the wisest approach. Try telling that to Darek and his glory hunters." Yara glanced toward the rowdy group. "They've already decided how tomorrow ends, with them standing triumphant over a massive corpse. And if it ends differently?" Jara's gaze returned to Kale, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "Then perhaps they'll finally listen to the small one from Earth." Morning came with a blood-red sunrise, the crimson light spilling across the desert like a warning. The hunting party broke camp efficiently, their movements charged with anticipation. Darek assigned positions for their approach, a standard pincer formation designed to trap the apex between two groups of hunters. "Kyle, you're with the second team," Darek ordered. "Stay behind Lorne and Vex. Try not to get in their way when the real work starts." The thinly veiled insult drew snickers from several team members, but Kyle ignored them, checking his equipment methodically. Unlike the others, who carried heavy plasma rifles and shock spears, his primary weapon was a compact neural disruptor, non-lethal but effective at temporarily incapacitating most life forms. The choice had earned him ridicule when they'd first departed Obsidian Spire. But Kale stood by it. Killing wasn't his objective. They followed the tracks for nearly 2 hours, the terrain gradually changing as they moved deeper into the desert. The endless dunes gave way to a rocky landscape where twisted spires of red stone rose from the sand like the ribs of some ancient, colossal beast. The tracks led directly into this natural labyrinth. "Perfect hunting ground for an ambush predator," Jara noted, her voice barely above a whisper. Darek signaled for the group to split as planned. He would lead Jara, Mira, and Thorn through the wider passages to the north, while Lorne would take Vex, Sella, and Kale south, circling around to flank the creature. "Remember," Darek said, his tone grave, "no one attempts to take down the apex alone. We hunt together or not at all." The words were directed at everyone, but his gaze lingered on Kale, as if expecting the smaller man to bolt at the first sign of danger. Kale's group moved cautiously through the narrower passages, the towering stone walls blocking much of the harsh sunlight. Lorne took point, his massive frame barely fitting through some of the tighter sections. Vex followed, with Sella, the team's medic, behind him. Kale brought up the rear, alert to every shadow and sound. They had been moving for perhaps 20 minutes when Kale noticed something odd about the passages they were navigating. The walls weren't natural formations, at least, not entirely. In places, the stone had been smoothed, and recurring patterns appeared at junctions, too regular to be random erosion. "Hold up," he called softly to the others. "Look at these markings. These passages have been modified." Vex turned with an impatient huff. "It's wind erosion, Earthman. Focus on the hunt." "Wind doesn't erode in geometric patterns," Kyle insisted, running his hand over a section of wall where a series of triangular indentations formed a consistent border. Someone, or something, has altered these passages. Lorne backtracked a few steps, frowning at the markings. For all his brute strength, the weapons specialist wasn't stupid. He's right, he admitted reluctantly. These are tool marks. The indigenous nomads? Maybe, Sela suggested, though she sounded doubtful. The desert tribes of Zikara were known to avoid this region. Before they could discuss further, a distant sound echoed through the stone corridors, a high-pitched, keening wail that made the hairs on Kale's arms stand on end. It was followed immediately by plasma fire and shouts. "The other team," Lorne said unnecessarily, already turning to race back the way they'd come. "They've engaged!" Vex and Sela followed without hesitation, but Kyle paused, staring deeper into the passage ahead. Something moved in the shadows, something small and quick. Nothing like the massive predator they were hunting. Trusting his instincts, Kale made a split-second decision and continued forward alone, ignoring Darek's earlier warning. The passage opened into a small circular chamber where several corridors converged. In the center, huddled against a stone pillar, was a creature unlike any Kale had seen on Zikara. About the size of a large earth fox, it had 6 limbs and a coat of iridescent scales that shifted color as it moved. 2 large, luminous eyes regarded Kale with unmistakable intelligence, and what appeared to be a wound leaked silvery fluid from its side. Kale approached slowly, holstering his disruptor and holding his hands out to show he meant no harm. The creature hissed weakly, backing further against the pillar. "It's okay," Kyle said softly, knowing his words wouldn't be understood, but hoping his tone would convey his intentions. "I'm not going to hurt you." From the opposite passage came another of those keening wails, louder this time, followed by the sound of something massive moving through the narrow corridors, stone cracking and crumbling under tremendous force. The wounded creature's eyes widened in what Kyle could only interpret as fear. Acting on impulse, Kale moved forward and carefully lifted the injured creature. It was surprisingly light, its body temperature much cooler than he'd expected. The creature stiffened, but didn't struggle as Kale tucked it gently inside his jacket. "Let's get you somewhere safe," he murmured, turning back the way he'd come. He'd taken only a few steps when the chamber shook violently. The passage through which he'd entered collapsed in a shower of stone and dust, blocking his escape route. Simultaneously, something enormous filled the corridor where the keening had originated, a sinuous form moving with uncanny speed despite its size. Kale pressed himself against the wall, holding the injured creature close as the apex predator entered the chamber. It was magnificent and terrifying. The creature stood at least 4 meters tall on its 6 segmented legs, its body covered in plates of natural armor that shifted and realigned as it moved, like living metal. Its elongated head housed multiple eyes that glowed with bioluminescence. And what Kale had initially taken for a mouth was actually a complex array of sensory appendages surrounding a central orifice lined with razor-sharp protrusions. Not teeth. Kale realized with scientific detachment that somehow cut through his fear. Crystalline structures, silicon-based, not carbon. The apex surveyed the chamber, its head swiveling with mechanical precision. When its glowing eyes fixed on Kyle, he felt a pressure in his mind, not painful, but intense, like someone pressing against a door in his consciousness. Then, its gaze dropped to the creature, hidden partially inside Kale's jacket, and the mental pressure intensified. The wounded creature trembled against Kale's chest, but emitted a soft trilling sound that seemed to give the massive predator pause. For a long moment, they remained frozen in tableau, human, injured creature, and apex predator locked in silent communion. Then, with a motion so swift Kale could barely track it, the apex retreated back into the passage, its massive form disappearing into the shadows with impossible grace. The mental pressure vanished, leaving Kale gasping. The injured creature chirped weakly, looking up at him with those luminous eyes. "What just happened?" Kale whispered, not expecting an answer. To his shock, the creature's trilling resolved into words inside his mind. Not exactly telepathy, but something close to it, translating concepts directly into language Kale could understand. "Protected," came the concept word. "You protected Sri," the Guardian saw. Kale stared down at the creature. "Sri, apparently. You can communicate with me? And that thing, the Apex? It's a Guardian." "Yes to first. Not Apex. Zythar, Guardian of Sacred Places, Protector of Sri kind." Before Kale could process this revelation, the sound of plasma fire and shouting grew louder again. The hunting party was engaging the Apex, the Zythar, somewhere nearby. "My companions," Kale said urgently. "They don't understand what they're hunting. They'll kill it if they can." Sri's mental voice carried a note of alarm. "If Zythar falls, the balance breaks. The desert dies. All die." "I need to stop them," Kale decided, looking around for another way out of the chamber. 3 passages remained open, and Sri indicated the leftmost with a gesture of one limb. "This way leads to them, but dangerous." "I'll take my chances," Kyle said, already moving. "Can you guide me?" The fox-like creature responded by climbing onto Kale's shoulder, its 6 limbs gripping securely. Its wound still leaked, but the flow had slowed. "Sri will guide. Human will help Zythar." "I'll try," Kale promised, breaking into a run as the sounds of battle intensified. "But first I need to keep my teammates from getting themselves killed." He emerged from the stone labyrinth to find chaos. The hunting party had cornered the Zythar in a natural amphitheater formed by curved stone walls. Plasma fire scored the creature's armored hide, leaving smoking furrows that quickly sealed themselves. 2 hunters lay motionless on the ground, Thorn and Mira, while the others maintained a loose circle around the massive predator. The Zythar moved with frightening speed despite its wounds, lashing out with crystalline appendages that extended and retracted from its body. As Kale watched, one such appendage narrowly missed Vex, shattering the stone wall behind him instead. "Hold your fire!" Kyle shouted, but his voice was lost in the cacophony of battle. Sri made a sound like chimes in Kale's mind, and suddenly, the fox-like creature glowed with intense blue-white light. The illumination pulsed once, twice, 3 times, and the Zythar immediately ceased its attack, drawing back its crystalline weapons and turning toward Kale and Sri. The hunters, seeing their opportunity, prepared to launch a coordinated attack. "Stop!" Kale's voice cut through the momentary lull with unexpected authority. "It's defending its territory! It's sentient!" Darek turned, his face contorted with battle rage and shock at seeing Kale. "What in Void's name are you doing, small one? And what is that creature?" "This is Sri," Kale said, stepping carefully into the amphitheater. "And that," he nodded toward the now still Zythar, "is not just a predator. It's a guardian of these lands. If we kill it, we destabilize the entire ecosystem." "Nonsense," Lorne growled, keeping his plasma rifle trained on the massive creature. "It's a beast, a dangerous one that's been attacking our harvesters." "Your harvesters were placed in sacred ground," Kale replied. Relaying information Sri was feeding directly into his mind. "You violated ancient boundaries." Jara lowered her weapon first, her gaze shifting between Kale, Sri, and the imposing form of the Zythar. "How do you know this?" Before Kale could answer, the ground beneath them trembled. Not the focused impact of the Zythar's movements, but a broader seismic event that sent cascades of sand and stone tumbling from the amphitheater walls. "Earthquake!" Sela cried, already moving toward the injured hunters. "Not earthquake," Sri's mental voice corrected grimly. "Sandstorm comes. Great storm. Death storm." As if summoned by the words, a wall of red-black cloud appeared on the horizon, advancing with terrifying speed. Kale had witnessed Zikara's notorious sandstorms before, but never one of this magnitude. The swirling mass of sand, dust, and static electricity would strip flesh from bone in minutes. "We need shelter," Darek shouted. Suddenly, all business. The hunt forgotten. "Back to the stone corridors." "No," Sri communicated urgently. "Corridors will flood with sand. Death trap." "We can't go back to the passages," Kale relayed. "They'll fill with sand." "Then where?" Vex demanded, his usual sneer replaced by naked fear as the storm wall grew visibly closer. The Zethar moved then, its massive form unfurling to its full height. It made a sound like grinding stone and turned, moving deliberately away from the approaching storm, deeper into the rocky terrain. "It shows the way," Sri explained, "to safety. Follow or die." "It's showing us the way to shelter," Kale translated, already moving after the creature. "Follow it, or stay, and die in the storm." For once, no one argued with the small one from Earth. Even Darek, after ensuring Sela had the injured hunters secured on portable stretchers, fell in behind Kale without question. The Zythar led them on a winding path through increasingly jagged terrain, moving with purpose toward a massive black stone formation that rose like a fortress from the desert floor. As they approached, Kale realized it was indeed a structure, a towering edifice of the same obsidian-like material that gave the settlement its name, but far older, weathered by millennia of sand and wind. Just as the leading edge of the storm reached them, bringing stinging particles and howling winds, the Zythar activated some unseen mechanism. A section of the black wall slid aside, revealing a passage large enough to accommodate the creature's bulk. It entered without hesitation, and the hunters followed, Kale bringing up the rear. The door slid shut behind them with seconds to spare, sealing with a hiss of ancient mechanisms awakening. Outside, the storm raged, the screaming wind audible even through the thick walls. Inside, soft blue illumination activated automatically, revealing a vast chamber whose walls were covered in intricate carvings, similar to the markings Kale had noticed in the stone passages. The room extended upward at least 30 meters, and passages led off in several directions. "What is this place?" Jara whispered, her voice hushed with awe. "Home," Sri answered simply in Kale's mind. "Old home, place of beginnings." "It's some kind of ancient structure," Kale said aloud for the others' benefit. "A sanctuary, I think." The Scythar moved to the center of the chamber, where a raised platform held what appeared to be a pool of silvery liquid. The creature extended one crystalline appendage and touched the surface, sending ripples across the metallic fluid. In response, the carvings on the walls glowed with increased intensity, and the liquid in the pool began to form shapes, three-dimensional projections that hovered in the air. "It's showing us something," Kale murmured, stepping closer. The others followed hesitantly, weapons lowered but not holstered. The projection showed Zikara as it once was, a world of blue skies and verdant landscapes, not the red desert they now knew. Figures moved across this pristine world, beings similar to Sri, but larger and more varied, living in harmony with creatures like the Zythar and many others unfamiliar to Kale. Then came destruction, massive ships descending from the skies, weapons of unimaginable power turning the paradise to ash and sand. The Sri race fought alongside their guardian creatures, but were overwhelmed. In a last, desperate act, they retreated to sanctuaries like this one, going into deep hibernation, while the Zythar remained as sentinels, protecting the sleeping ancients and maintaining what balance they could in the devastated ecosystem. "They're the original inhabitants," Kale breathed, understanding dawning. "Not extinct as we believed, but hibernating, waiting." "Waiting for what?" Darek asked, his earlier hostility replaced by cautious curiosity. The projection shifted again, showing the red desert slowly recovering, new life forms evolving, and eventually, human colonists arriving, establishing the Obsidian Spire settlement directly over an ancient Sri sanctuary without realizing it. The recent water harvester installations had damaged old systems, threatening the hibernation chambers deep below. "The attacks on the harvesters," Jara said slowly. "They weren't random aggression." "No," Kyle agreed. "The Zythar was trying to protect its charges, the last survivors of Zykara's original civilization." The projection faded, the silvery liquid settling back into the pool. The Zythar turned its glowing gaze on the humans, the mental pressure returning, but differently now, less intrusive, more communicative. "It asks what we will do now that we know," Sri translated. "Will humans continue destruction or help heal?" Kale relayed the question to his companions. For a long moment, no one spoke, the enormity of the revelation sinking in. Then, Darek stepped forward, his weapon finally holstered. "We didn't know," he said simply, addressing the Zythar directly. "Tell it we didn't know what we were doing." The mental pressure shifted, becoming almost curious. "Zythar understands words through me," Sri explained. "It asks if humans will relocate water harvesters. Allow Sri to heal." "Yes," Darek replied without hesitation, surprising Kale. "We need water to survive, but we can find it elsewhere. We won't disturb your people's rest." The Scythar made a sound like distant thunder, its massive form shifting in what Kale interpreted as approval. Then, it extended a crystalline appendage toward Sela and the injured hunters. "It offers healing," Sri communicated. "Xithar has power to mend wounds it caused." Sela looked uncertain, but Kale nodded encouragingly. "Let it help them. I believe it means no harm now that we understand each other." With obvious reluctance, Sela stepped aside. The Zythar approached the unconscious forms of Thorn and Mira, extending gossamer-thin filaments from its crystalline appendages. The filaments gently probed the hunter's injuries, leaving a trace of silvery fluid similar to what had leaked from Sri's wound. Before their eyes, the grievous wounds began to close, healthy tissue regenerating at an accelerated rate. "Incredible," Sela whispered, her medical scanner recording the process. "Their cellular regeneration is off the charts." Within minutes, both hunters were breathing normally, their injuries reduced to faint, silvery scars. They remained unconscious, but Sri assured Kale they would wake naturally once the healing was complete. "The storm will continue through the night," Darek said, checking the atmospheric readings on his wrist unit. "We're safe here, but stranded until morning at least." "I think that was the idea," Kyle replied, watching as the Zythar retreated to a far corner of the chamber, settling its massive form like a sentinel. "It wanted time to show us the truth, to see if we could be trusted." Jara approached, studying Sri with undisguised fascination. "And can we be? Trusted, I mean." Kale glanced at the fox-like creature perched comfortably on his shoulder. "What do you think? Can humans and Sri coexist peacefully?" Sri's mental voice carried a complex emotion that translated as cautious hope. "Some humans, yes. This one, an impression of Kale. Protects without question. Others may learn." "Some of us already are," Jara said with a small smile, though Kale hadn't translated Sri's exact words. Something in her expression suggested she'd somehow understood anyway. The expedition team made camp within the ancient sanctuary, setting up their thermal units for warmth as the desert night brought plummeting temperatures. Even inside the thick-walled structure, the howling of the sandstorm penetrated, a constant reminder of the deadly environment beyond. As the others settled in, Kyle approached the Zythar, Sri still perched on his shoulder. The massive guardian observed him with those glowing eyes, the mental pressure gentle now, almost welcoming. "I want to understand more," Kale said directly to the creature. "About your kind, about the Sri, about what happened to this world. Maybe we can help restore some of what was lost." Through Sri, the Zythar's response came as a series of impressions and concept words, Human small in body, but spirit large, mind open, rare quality. Zythar will show. The Guardian extended a crystalline appendage, indicating that Kale should follow. They moved deeper into the sanctuary, through passages that lit with soft blue illumination as they progressed. Behind them, Jara followed at a respectful distance, her curiosity evidently overcoming any lingering fear. They descended several levels via sloping corridors, eventually emerging into a vast underground chamber that took Kyle's breath away. Thousands of crystalline pods lined the walls and floor, each containing a suspended Sri in various forms, some resembling Sri but larger, others more diverse in appearance, yet clearly of the same species. "The hibernation chambers," Kale breathed. "How many?" "Last city," Sri communicated sadly. "Last 10,000. Once were millions across world." The Zythar approached one particular section, where several pods glowed with a different, more intense light. Inside these, the suspended Sri showed signs of movement, the beginning stages of awakening. "These ones stir because of human water machines," Sri explained. "Disrupted sleep patterns. Dangerous to wake too soon, before world ready." "The harvesters," Jara said from behind them, having followed their conversation through Kale's responses. "They're interfering with the hibernation technology somehow." "Resonance frequencies. Maybe," Kale theorized, examining one of the pods closely. "Our machinery operates on wavelengths that interact with these systems." The Zythar confirmed this with a mental impression of agreement. Then, it showed them something else. A map of the region projected from another pool of the silvery liquid. It highlighted the location of the Obsidian Spire settlement in relation to the ancient Sri city beneath it, and then indicated another location, several kilometers to the east. "Water there," came the concept. "Deep underground, abundant, safe to harvest without disturbing sleepers." "It's showing us where we can relocate our water harvesters," Kyle explained to Jara. "An alternative water source that won't interfere with the hibernation pods." Jara studied the map intently. "The Council will want verification, but if this is accurate, it solves our immediate problem. We can redirect the harvesters without losing our water supply." The Zythar seemed satisfied with this response. It led them back to the main chamber, where the rest of the team had established their temporary camp. Thorn and Mira had regained consciousness and were being briefed by Sela and Darek on what they'd missed. As they entered, all eyes turned to Kale, not with the usual derision, but with a new respect that felt foreign after so long being the outsider, the small one to be tolerated at best. "The Zythar has shown us an alternative water source," Kyle announced, gesturing for Yara to explain the details. As she did, he noticed Darek watching him with an unreadable expression. When Yara finished, Darek approached Kale directly. The expedition leader's imposing height seemed less intimidating somehow, now that other perspectives had been forced upon him. "You were right," Darek said simply. "About the tracks, about the intelligence behind them, about everything." Kale nodded, accepting the acknowledgement without comment. "Why did you bring that neural disruptor instead of a proper weapon?" Darek asked suddenly. "You knew something, didn't you? Even before we left Obsidian Spire." "I suspected," Kale corrected. "The attack patterns on the harvesters were too precise, too targeted. It wasn't mindless predation. I thought there might be intelligence involved, and I didn't want to kill something that might be trying to communicate." Darek considered this, then shook his head with a rueful smile. "The Council chose better than they knew when they assigned you to this expedition. They thought your scientific background would be useful for analyzing the Apex after we killed it. Instead, you've discovered an entire lost civilization." "Sri deserves the credit," Kyle said, glancing at the fox-like creature who had curled up comfortably against his neck. "Without this little one, we'd still be shooting at the Zythar, probably getting ourselves killed in the process." The storm continued through the night. But inside the ancient sanctuary, a different kind of change was brewing. The hunters of Obsidian Spire, who had arrived seeking glory and the death of a legendary predator, now sat in contemplative silence, processing the revelation that their settlement had been built, unknowingly, atop an alien civilization in suspended animation. Kal spent the hours documenting everything he could about the Shri and their guardian, with Shri providing context and explanation through their mental link. The fox-like creature's wound had fully healed, leaving only a faint, silvery mark on its iridescent scales. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the landscape transformed. Dunes had shifted, familiar landmarks buried or exposed, the very topography altered by the force of wind and sand. The Zythar led them from the sanctuary back to the surface, where they beheld a world washed clean by the storm. The triple suns of Sykara cast long shadows across the rippled sand, and in the distance, the black spire of their settlement was just visible on the horizon. 2 days' journey, with the new terrain, Darek estimated, shielding his eyes against the glare. The Zythar extended one of its crystalline appendages, touching the sand. In response, the ground trembled slightly, and from beneath the surface emerged a vessel of some kind, an elongated craft of the same obsidian-like material as the sanctuary, large enough to transport all of them. Zythar offers faster way, Sri explained. We'll take humans home. Is it safe? Vex asked, eyeing the strange craft with suspicion. Kale looked to the Zythar, feeling that now familiar mental pressure. Yes, came the simple answer. Zythar guides. Sri translates. Human accepts. It's safe, Kyle assured the others, and certainly faster than walking. With some hesitation, the expedition team boarded the vessel, securing the still recovering Thorn and Mira in the center. The craft had no visible controls, but once they were all aboard, it began to move smoothly across the sand, guided by the Zythar who traveled alongside, its massive form keeping pace effortlessly. They reached the outskirts of Obsidian Spire by midday, causing a sensation as they approached. The sight of the hunting party returning in an alien vessel, accompanied by what the settlement had been calling the apex predator, brought every available defender to the perimeter walls, weapons trained on the Zythar. "Hold your fire!" Darek shouted as they disembarked. "It comes in peace!" The next hours were a blur of explanations and revelations. The council was summoned, evidence presented, and decisions made with unprecedented speed. Kale found himself the center of attention as he explained what they had discovered, with Sri remaining perched on his shoulder, occasionally adding details through their mental link. The Zythar waited patiently outside the settlement's walls, its massive form visible to all, but making no threatening moves. Children, initially frightened, gradually grew curious, approaching the perimeter to gaze in wonder at the creature their parents had taught them to fear. By evening, a preliminary agreement had been reached. The water harvesters would be relocated to the site the Zythar had indicated, work beginning immediately. A joint research team would be established to study the Sri civilization and determine how best to proceed with the awakening of the hibernating ancients, when the time was right. And Kale, the small one from Earth, who had been tolerated rather than respected, was appointed as the official liaison between humans and Sri, the first diplomatic posting of its kind on Zikara. As the formal council session concluded, Kale stepped outside to where the Zythar waited. The triple suns were setting, casting the creature's crystalline appendages in a rainbow of refracting light. Sri trilled happily on Kale's shoulder, communicating with its much larger kin in ways Kale could sense, but not quite understand. Jara joined him, standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "So," she said with a small smile, "not bad for someone who was supposed to stay out of the way when the real work started." Kale chuckled. "I'm still not sure Darek has forgiven me for being right." "He'll adapt," Jara replied. "We all will. Everything changes from today." As if hearing its name, The Zythar turned its attention to them, that familiar mental pressure building. But this time, Kale sensed something new in the connection, something like respect, or perhaps recognition. Then, to his astonishment, the massive guardian lowered its elongated head and bent its segmented legs in what could only be described as a bow. Xythar acknowledges defender of Sri, came the concept words through their mental link. Small human with large spirit, protector of balance. A crowd had gathered to witness the interaction, and a collective gasp rose as the apex predator, the terror of Zikara's deep desert, knelt before the smallest member of their community. Darek pushed through the onlookers, coming to stand beside Kale. For a moment, he simply observed the tableau in silence. Then, with a deliberate motion that sent ripples of shock through the watching crowd, he too inclined his head toward Kale. "The Zythar is wiser than we were," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "It recognized your worth immediately, while we were blinded by our own prejudice." Kale felt heat rise to his face, uncomfortable with the sudden reversal of his status. "I just observed what others overlooked," he said quietly. "Anyone could have done the same." "But they didn't," Jara pointed out. "You did." The Zythar rose from its bow, once more towering over them all. Through Sri, it communicated one final message before departing to continue its ancient vigil. "Desert seems harsh, unforgiving, but desert teaches truth. Strength not in size, not in power. Strength in adaptation, in understanding, in connection. Small human understands. Others may learn. If so, when Sri wake fully, perhaps new beginning possible. For all." As the massive guardian moved away, its form soon lost against the darkening horizon, Kyle felt a profound sense of purpose settle over him. The path ahead would not be easy, convincing an entire settlement to adapt their way of life, preparing for the eventual awakening of an ancient civilization, building understanding between species that had evolved on different worlds. But standing there, with Sri warm against his neck and the respect of his peers finally earned, Kale knew he was exactly where he needed to be. His smaller stature, once a mark of derision, had allowed him to see what others missed, to question what others accepted, to connect where others fought. In the harsh desert of Zikara, where adaptation meant survival, perhaps the greatest adaptation of all was learning to value difference rather than fear it. The triple moons rose over Obsidian Spire, casting silver light across the red sands. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, for the first time since arriving on this unforgiving world, Kale felt truly at home. In the distance, a keening call echoed across the desert, the voice of the Zythar. No longer a sound of terror, but a reminder of the ancient wisdom that slept beneath the sands, waiting for the day when all who called Zykara home might finally understand each other. And on Kale's shoulder, Sri trilled a response, a promise carried on the night wind. They would be ready when that day came.